Hey everyone, welcome to the Weight Champions podcast this week. This is your host, John O'Sullivan, and I'm so excited this week to welcome Becky Carlson to the podcast. Becky is the women's rugby coach at Quinnipiac University. She's a three-time national champion, and in her 13 years at the helm of Quinnipiac, she started a brand new program. There wasn't even a club team there to become a three-time national champion. She's coached numerous. She's been to six of seven seasons to the Final Four or to the Nationals and coached 13 All-Americans. She's also a graduate of the NCAA Coaches Academy and a recipient of the 2015 Judy Sweet Award from the Academy. But I have come to know Becky from her work as the fearless leader and her posts on LinkedIn advocating for issues in coaching and team culture development. I think her first piece that I saw was called An Open Letter to the Athlete We Must Stop Recruiting, which was one of the highest viewed articles on coaching on LinkedIn. And we'll discuss that here today. And she's become this fearless advocate for coaches at all levels outside of her coaching role. And to do that, she's actually a current student at Tulane University Law School, seeking a degree in law, specializing in labor and employment law, and trying to help coaches understand their roles and their responsibilities and their rights as a coach. Because we have a lot of football coaches, right, who you know they have these golden parachutes if something goes wrong. But for most coaches for Olympic sports, they're supporting their family. If they lose their job over an athlete complaint or a misunderstanding or whatever, there is no golden parachute. They have revolving 1 year contracts, and their family might have to pick up and move. They might have to leave, and it's a very, very difficult situation, especially in a lot of the changes that have happened in sport post-COVID as well. So we're going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about a new article that she has written about coaches working with support staff and how that has become difficult for many coaches on the collegiate level as well. So if you're a coach who has felt at times unsupported, or if you're a coach who has felt like, man, it's really hard to uphold standards or demands or things like that, this podcast is for you. Okay. Now, before we dive in, on the website, changethegameproject.com, top banner, Way of Champions Conference. Registration is open. Early bird registration is open. You can save $100 by just clicking on the Way of Champions Conference link there. We are getting ready to announce our first speaker. I just spoke to him today. Super, super excited for this one, and so much more. So get ready and get set for that conference. Also, get ready for our great friends at Sprocket Sports as you're flipping your sports year here. Um, if you're looking for a new website, a new marketing tool, a new registration system, check out our friends at sprocketsports.com. They have an amazing front end, amazing back end, amazing customer support, communication tool, everything you need to run your organization better. So if you reach out and you talk to them, tell them that you heard about them on the Way of Champions podcast. Okay. But until then, get ready, get set. This is going to be a really, really interesting talk today. So get ready for Becky Carlson, everyone. Enjoy. Becky, welcome to the Way Champions podcast.
Thank you for having me, John.
I'm a huge fan. This is the first time you and I have met and chatted in person, but I feel like I know you because I've been reading your articles for years and thinking every time I read one, I think I need to get her on the podcast. This is great stuff. And then especially lately, as you've gone to law school and really talking about the rights of coaches, these are things that I keep hearing from coaches that I know, and so you've become sort of this great leader and advocate for people at your level of coaching who are just saying, "Hey, we need some support too." So talk about your journey, and maybe let's just start with your coaching journey because I mean, you're a three-time national champion coach in rugby as well. You were a collegiate athlete. You've worn all the hats.
Indeed, I think that's, fearless coaching was created in or around 2016 based upon experiences that I was having actually during the time that I was securing my second national championship here at Quinnipiac with the women's rugby program. So I think that was at a really, really critical point where I realized and had actually penned the open letter to the athlete that we need to stop recruiting, and was not expecting the response that I got from that particular article. It took me probably 25 minutes to write that, and I thought about not posting it. And the next day it blew up, and it was less about the content of that particular piece than it was about the connections that I made, realizing that there is this whole population of coaches out there that even in 2016, it's much more pronounced now, but even back then in 2016, we had a pretty critical mass of coaches that were searching in some way, trying to, I think, avoid the place that we're at now.
Yeah.
And connecting with those coaches and building that network has just been, it's been a really heartbreaking, but also tremendous experience for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's amazing stuff. Maybe start with that article because I'm pretty sure that's how I crossed paths with your name and your work. And it's certainly, it's funny. I would say that the articles that I've written in 10 plus years of blogging, the most popular ones poured out of me in 15 or 20 minutes as well. They came from the heart. They came from listening to a lot of feedback and common questions, and then they just poured out. And then I yeah, like, should I publish this because this is going to piss some people off? And then next thing you know, it does, but it also resonates with so many people. Like you've articulated what they're all thinking and didn't know how to put into words.
Right. Absolutely. I had no idea the effect that would have, but it really, I should have just said in the beginning of that piece that this is a compilation of so many experiences based upon exactly what you just said, the coaching network and these silent frustrations where at one point in our history as a profession we were able to say it's unacceptable to not be on time, or these are the standards. And people would say, yes, these are the standards. Now there is a need for fearless coaching because there is consistently an exception to the rule in everything. You
Mhm.
cannot post anything on social media anymore that begs for there to be a flat out standard.
Mhm.
There is the propensity for our society when we see any type of directive for athletes to say, well, coaches need to do that too. Well, it is. It's understood that everyone should be behaving appropriately and should be dialed into the standard and the process of whatever the organization is. But when we say these things out loud now, it is automatically followed up with these lessons that go back to the coach. And we don't have a one-way street anymore. And I don't know if that was altogether the most healthy thing. And the way we've evolved is good for us in a sense, but
Mhm.
there has to be some standards that we uphold. And I think there is a whole line of coaches and like I said earlier, a critical mass that is just dying to say these things. So I really hope that those articles serve as a mouthpiece for those people that are frustrated.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that article because I think this will give people a great sense of who you are and what you believe in. What what made an athlete someone you needed to stop recruiting? What were the things that you were seeing and other coaches were seeing that said, you know what, this person's not going to be a fit for our program?
So many of the intangibles that I think are lost a lot in the dialogue when we talk about how the general belief of parents that these are stats, they are things only to be looked at that are tangible. And you can see attitude. It is
Yeah.
certainly not, you can see attitude. You can measure effort. You can look at all of the things out happening in the pool, on the track, on the field. You can look at body language. And I think these are attributes that are sometimes wildly disregarded because they're not being taught at the lower levels. And that was certainly a frustration of mine, especially when we got into the conversations about cell phones and about distractions and about really being committed to the recruiting process and how difficult these devices in your hand make that, and just wanting to put it all out there, just for a level of awareness that coaches are watching. And again, you're right. I got so much blowback. I got a lot more positivity came out of that, but I
Right.
did get blowback. It was like, who wants to be recruited by this coach who's nitpicking everything? And
Mm-hmm.
who wants to be coached? There's one particular article, and I won't even advertise it, but it's actually one of the ones that stands out when you Google me, and it's not a nice expletive, but it does actually drive a lot of attention to my site. So,
Mm-hmm.
press is bad press. And it was essentially saying that, who would want to play for this coach anyway. And the fascinating part too, John, is as it circulated throughout the internet, I would see people screenshot it. They would not give credit, but when it started to turn over and get recycled more and more, the assumption was that I was male and also a football coach.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd say this guy knows exactly what he's talking about, and then it would be like, and when they knew I was a woman, there was a question about why anyone would want to play for me. So it
Mm-hmm.
was really fascinating to look at that dynamic and kind of dissect how that affected the way people related to the article.
Well, what's interesting is when that pushback comes, it comes from, I think, um, this positive self-esteem movement that we now know was not helpful to kids, but harmful to kids, where they're never told no, they're never told, held to a standard. They're like, well, if that's the way you thought it was best, then that was definitely right. Versus, no, there is a standard. There is a way of doing things here that, you know, like Quinnipiac rugby doesn't have to be for everybody. It only has to be for a certain couple of people every year. Same with UConn basketball, same with, right? Name any successful year after year, I mean, Dawn Staley at South Carolina, it's not for everyone. And it's not just for talented basketball players either. Like you have to have a certain work ethic and competitive grit and all these different things. And so there's this movement for too long, which now thankfully there's some pushback of, well, holding someone to a standard is the worst thing that we could do. Yet I think it's the best thing that we can do as long as it's done in the right way.
Indeed, I think, John, what's interesting about what you just said is uh, this is a pretty prevalent conversation currently within my own squad. And being able to illuminate this generation to some of these habits that they have formed is a real journey for me. And you just stated it, this level of positivity that we have to be positive at all costs. And I know you've spoken to Molly Grisham before on your podcast, and she said, on the other side of truth is transformation. So we don't often find our athletes that have been in environments that have been, either the coach has not been permitted to tell them the truth, or there are barriers within the programs they've been exposed to that don't allow open dialogue on things that need to improve.
Or
And
or parents, I'll just sorry to interrupt, but or parents pay to avoid the harsh truth, right? They pay the coach so much money that they're not going to tell them the truth. Or when a coach does become a truth teller, they they just switch clubs, switch teams, switch whatever, right? And they shield their kids from this adversity over and over and over. We just had this guy Eric Potter out on the podcast, Navy SEALs mental performance, and he talks about like the scariest thing I ever see is a 25-year-old who's never faced adversity in his or her life. So keep going, but I just wanted to throw that in there.
no, it's true. And what we're seeing is this influx of that generation. And I get it. The whole conversation about this generation, and they're so different. And you hear it all the time. The adults have changed, not necessarily the athletes. We've changed in the way that we respond to their discomfort. And a perfect example of this, I have it in the works now, and you're motivating me to finish it by just touching on this topic. But it's the three words that are absolutely detrimental in our squad conversations with our team. And the 3 words are, I feel like.
Yeah.
And those 3 words, just analyzing how often and how frequent they are, that phrase is used in their everyday conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I have attended breakfasts, lunches with my team just to watch them interact. And when you are consistently presenting things and saying, I feel like, there is a very staunch neutrality about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not it's not making statements, it is giving opinions. And therefore, when you remain neutral, there never has to be any action items.
Mm-hmm.
So that carryover from their social interactions goes out into the field where they go, I feel like we might not be getting to the rocks. And my response is, are we or aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
What is the action item to follow?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're at a place where we are attempting in a very delicate manner, slowly but surely, to eradicate that from our language so we can be more productive. And it's less about satiating my desire for the team to speak differently, but more for us to be productive and
Mm-hmm.
to garner results that are what that align with our goals.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's critical language.
Yeah, well, I mean, language is a huge part of culture, and so let's talk about the Quinnipiac rugby culture. What does it what does it feel like to be coached by you? What does it feel like to be part of that team? Because what is it like to be in that locker room if I'm a recruited athlete? Um, what do I see at practice every day? What do or in the ideal world, right? Not every practice is perfect, but we try to be pretty good on our bad days as well.
Yeah, I think, John, that if you wanted to know that genuinely, you would have to ask one of my players. But from my perspective
Hmm.
as a coach, what you would see is honesty. You would see a machine that is operating with the full intention that we have a goal that we are going to meet together. And if you are not interested in rowing at the front of the boat and you're sitting in the back of the boat, you will get left.
Hmm.
And I think that even sounds harsh to
Hmm.
people when we talk about that from a recruiting standpoint. And I am still insistent that while recruiting and this process and our culture at any school is about marketing and trying to get the best player and impressing them, they need to impress us as well.
Yeah.
And I think that mutual understanding is something that allows us to filter through those who have a desire to join that culture and those who do not. And because it's difficult sometimes for 18 to 22-year-olds to fully articulate that until they're 30. Most of my players contact me when they're 30 going, this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Coaching's never immediate. It can be, but it's not often immediate gratitude.
Right.
So the evolution of how they see that culture certainly comes at a later date. So those people saying that we do it for this reputation is we're not always anyone's favorite person.
Right, but these things that you want to see in your locker room, and yes, we might have to ask your player, but these are also your non-negotiables as well. Because if they don't come from you as the head coach, right? If honesty matters to you, or if joy matters to you, or if hard work matters to you, if respect matters to you, then that's gonna a good coach that you see that in her players, you see that in his players, you see that in that locker room. And so those things come from you. And because if you're not authentically creating something that you want to be a part of, then you lose the joy, you lose the passion pretty quickly, right? So I think the best coaches, their teams are reflections of the values that matter to the coach the most.
And I agree, John. I think that one of the things that is challenging within coaching today is that the inspiration on self oversight. If you
Hmm.
were to, I was very telling. I had a disc session with one of my athletes, and one of my athletes was asked a question by the facilitator that said, "Okay, you're in this particular situation at practice. You're under a lot of stress. What do you do first?" And I said, well, I would talk to my teammates about how they can help me. And they said, well, what would you do before that? They said, talk to coach about how they can help me. What would you do before that.
Hmm.
And it was a stump. They were stumped.
Yeah.
And ultimately it was how will you triage within yourself before you're reaching for other people to help you? What
Yeah.
are some mechanisms that you can use? And it's something as simple as breathing and managing from within before you're looking outward to all of these branches or these life rafts to save you in moments of stress.
Yeah, but so many kids now in the youth sport culture, because it's so focused on the results and winning this tournament, they get joysticked around. So they're just waiting for the outside input, right? Whether it's from a teammate or usually it's from a coach to move them to the right position to help make the right decision. And then they get to an environment where the intelligence has to be on the field and they're toast, right? Or that self-awareness has to be on the field and they're toast. And this is the challenge is in youth coaching, we have to advocate for failure and take that step back and let kids solve problems. Like I've talked on the podcast here recently. One of my proudest moments, I have a group of 16-year-old boys that I coach. And the first game of the season, defensively, we were struggling with something. It was halftime. And the team captain came over and he said, Coach, give me the magnet board. And he grabbed the board and he fixed it. And I was like, that's it. I got nothing else to say. And he solved the problem. I'm like, that kid's ready for the next level, right?
Yeah.
Because he's thinking about how we can fix this. And I'm going to now show my teammates how we can fix this. And I think you can't have that in players if you treat them like soldiers all week and just follow orders.
Right. And the unique aspect, I think, in certainly from a field sports standpoint for rugby is there is no real stoppage.
You're right.
So we know as well as anybody else in soccer, in rugby, it's difficult for them to even hear you
Yeah.
during the game. I ask my players all the time, how much can you hear me? Not at all.
Right.
Not at all. So I'm doing all of it. Really, it's just animation at that point, because if I haven't done my job in practice of allowing them to troubleshoot themselves and I'm constantly orchestrating that, they don't have practice in it. So therefore, how are
Yeah.
they going to do it
Yeah.
inside the game? Which is
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly
And the
what you.
moment is lost anyway if it's the player on the ball or the player next to the ball. Like sometimes the player off the ball can get a little bit of, whatever. But if they're involved in the immediate play, yeah, they're anything they take from you, it's already too late.
Yeah, yeah, and there as part of the culture, one of the things that we are constantly practicing is offering the opportunity to players that may possess a profile that is not always the most outspoken, but those are often some of your players that have really valuable insight. They just have never really had that pulpit to stand on based upon their sporting experience, their familial relations, like however they've been raised, and you offering that opportunity. So when there is something not going well, tapping that kid on the shoulder and going, hey, what do you think we need more of? And them
Yeah.
telling you privately and being very confident and going, I have an idea. Why don't you stop this for me? And
Hmm.
why don't you share with the rest of the group? And they're
Hmm.
like, okay.
Yeah.
So the old adage about, kids just need to quote, be confident. I don't love that. I don't
No.
love the phrase. It's developing self-belief. And they're not doing that if we're doing all the talking.
Right. And that self-belief, it comes from number one, competence that I know how to do it. And, two, that I understand the tactics or the game. And so I understand what's happening around me. And then number three, then I'm in an environment where I'm allowed, where my voice can be heard, where it's safe to speak up and things like that. And understanding that, hey, like a lot of right high school players across sports, they come into the collegiate level and now they're playing with players who are 3, 4, 5 years older than them and have that many more reps at that sport, right? So your voice isn't going to be as big as maybe it was back back in high school or whatever. So those people have a lot more reps at a lot higher level than you do. So sometimes it's also learning to just step back and listen for a bit and learn. I meet these kids who are like, well, but on my club, I always got to talk in the huddle. Well, welcome to the program. You haven't earned that right yet. you know?
Right. Right. And I think you're touching a lot on those parallels of, those natural and adapted behaviors, because those opportunities have they have a direct effect on how they're going to approach everything for the rest of their life. And
Mhm.
I say, when we're in these circles and we're talking and you're raising your hand and you're waiting to talk, as our female athletes often will, they'll move on to a job, they'll be in a boardroom, and they will allow people to insert ideas and speak over them without waiting their turn. And so we don't say, gather up or huddle up. We say claim space.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's just a different language
Yeah.
altogether.
I like that. I mean, going back to this, you said a while back, and it just popped back into my head about, how oftentimes our athletes don't appreciate the lessons they've learned or the standards they've been held to until 5, 10 years later, right? And then they invite you to their wedding or whatever it is, right? And like, that's what you meant. Now I appreciate that. And so it always scares me. When we do teacher evaluations, professor evaluations, and certainly coach evaluations in the moment, because we know empirically, I mean, there's research on this. David Epstein talked about it in the book Range, that the professors who get the highest ratings often have the worst long term results in student performance. And I would say for coaches as well, it would be similar in that the coaches who are, you know, the biggest buddy in the moment probably don't get the results and over time, it's like that grudging acceptance. Like if you like your coach in every moment, I don't think your coach is doing his or her job.
Right. Yeah, and you're hitting on the larger theme, right? It's loyalty be in a coach athlete relationship based upon how rocky or smooth that road may be is very fleeting, and it
Mm,
can be. I mean, one day you can be the hero, and the next day you're making the starting lineup and you're the villain. And it's something it's that for 18 to 22-year-olds, that again, it can escape you. That loyalty can escape you, and you as if you are a seasoned coach that understands this business and profession,
mm,
you get that. And
mm,
it's not a day-to-day feeling of do they like me or don't they like me. There is an understanding there that is a very, very it's a very fleeting response that they'll have, and that's normal. They're 18 to 22-year-olds whose frontal lobes haven't developed yet.
yeah.
They're going through lots of changes and transformations. And the point you made about surveys. Now, we could probably talk all day long about the methodology that the industry is using in order to be able to measure success and how that's failing us. I
Hmm.
mean, realistically, what we're looking at is I did 70 FOIA requests to the to all of the Power Five schools to look at their surveys and the questions that they were asking. And they're not collecting data. I don't want to call it data. They're collecting opinions,
Yeah.
and those opinions are not being used for the betterment of the department. They are not being used in a way where admins are equipped to be able to evaluate coaches properly on the right uh, on the right criteria. But they're used for litigation avoidance.
Yeah.
And it's just as insurance, and that's not good for anyone's ecosystem in terms of why or what the motivation is to collect opinions and
Hmm.
populate them in a way that puts someone's job on the line based upon dissatisfaction from the game you lost that ended your senior season.
Right. Exactly. Or the game that you got benched, or the position you thought you should play and didn't get to play, and then it's like, oh well, I'll get him back, I'll get her back, I'll get him in the exit interview, right? And it's like, well, I mean, it's almost like, where's the follow-up interview 5 years later? Now evaluate your coach's performance. That would mean a lot more to me than in the moment, right? And especially when we think about today's student athlete who, especially at the Division I level, has always played, has always started, has never sat on the bench, never asked to be, to fulfill a minor role, right? And then you go to Michigan, Ohio State, USC, and everyone's the same as you, right?
Right.
And then they're 3 years older, right? And so you don't know how to deal with this. I'm not getting on the field, but I got to show up at practice every day. And so you get bitter. And I think Molly Grisham talks about this well. It's really important for the coach to, help the athlete understand the relationship of the recruited athlete and the relationship of the athlete I'm coaching is two different things. And so we have to help them understand, like, I was trying to get you to come here, and now I'm trying to get you better. Now, I didn't sell you a bill of goods. I shouldn't change as a person, but my role is different in this moment. And so I think this is important, right?
Yeah, you hear that quite often too. If you were to read criticisms on coaches, it's, oh, they were one person when they were recruiting me, and then they were another when I finally arrived. And
Yeah.
that's not uncommon to hear that. But I think the thing that Molly Grisham does better than anyone else in the business with her Coach Ready program, and Team Ready program, is that it promotes a sense of connection where you're actually sitting with your players
Mm-hmm.
and you are explaining those challenges to them with Molly present to
Mm-hmm.
say, here's the difference. This is why these two experiences are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why it's critical to the development of the program that you recognize that this is why they're different. So
Mm-hmm.
it was invaluable to our program. It's probably one of the top three things I've ever done with my team that was the most valuable to our culture.
That's awesome. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
she's great. I mean, when she was on, I was just like taking notes and like this stuff is great. And I get her newsletter and everything. Yeah,
I
she
can't write
really
fast enough. I can't write fast enough on Molly.
yeah, she's awesome. So this relationship changes, right? And this kind of gets into we're starting to shift into your newest article here. Um, this relationship changes, and now we have COVID in 2020, and the issue of athlete mental health, mental wellness, whatever call, goes to the forefront. Um, and so universities, rightly so, say, okay, let's hire support staff. Let's hire people to support this. But as your new article sort of touches at, like, all of a sudden, instead of, having a head coach with support staff, it's almost like the support staff is in charge of the head coach. And now what do I report and what do I not report? And I've used the analogy, and maybe it's not perfect, because they say, oh, well, if a athlete complains to the sports psychologist because of HIPAA, they can't say anything. But when an athlete has a knee injury, the trainer can say she has a knee injury, right? And that knee injury gives you a lens into why is that athlete not performing at her normal level or his normal level. Well, if there's something going on um, between the ears, and it could have nothing to do with you as the coach, right? Their parents could be getting divorced, their dad just died, whatever it is. And if you don't have that information, um, or your communication is not aligning with how the athlete is used to be communicated to, but no one tells you, how are you supposed to be a better coach? And this is the issue, isn't it?
Exactly. I think we've infused more staff to allegedly solve this problem. It was not coupled with the proper training to understand how the constituency that we serve and recruit is different. And they are different because we had a global pandemic where for almost 2 years, our athletes who are 18 years old now that are going to come in next year were 16. They're basically 16 when they
Mm-hmm.
come in because they're
Mm-hmm.
2 years behind
Mm-hmm.
developmentally, experience wise, socially. We're not taking into account the levels to which they were not exposed to opportunities that help them in the maturation process.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself is a huge gap when you look at the language that athletes use that are often riddled with buzzwords
Mm-hmm.
where support staff, if you are a coach that knows the language and that hears your athletes on a daily basis, there are things you'd say, okay, that's their maturity level, they're choosing the wrong words. But if
Mm-hmm.
you are a support staff who is not overly involved, but maybe sporadically once there's a 5 alarm fire,
Hmm.
hear these things, it sends that whole relationship between the program and the coach into this really unknown territory, and
Hmm.
it gets pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think we really haven't grasped the impact that flip has had, where exactly what you're saying, support staff has kind of overshadowed coaches' abilities to make those decisions based upon either a litigious fear or other repercussions that are unknown.
Yeah, you write in an article. I love this quote. You said coaches are now more frequently regarded with mistrust and increasingly more as people whom athletes require protection from rather than supportive figures looking to instill values, teach and develop athletes in their sport. And I mean that's it right there. So all of a sudden, this and I've heard this from so many coaches, as I'm sure you have as well, is like that all of a sudden everything I do is viewed with mistrust. But no, I mean, why wouldn't I have this kid's best interest in mind? I want to do well. I want to win, right?
Right.
I want the team to do well. I'm gonna pick players that I think are gonna help us win, who are performing in practice, who I see every day, right? Performing. Like the sports psychologist isn't out there at practice. And so they don't see this. But I've never met a coach who's like, yeah, that person could, pretty much guarantee us a win this weekend, but I'm just not gonna play him because I don't like, whatever. Like, unless they've done something against team standards, team rules, like, yeah, they're going to play.
Exactly. I think often, John, it's not necessarily even about us in that structure. It's maybe what they were exposed to prior to their arrival
Yeah.
in college. I mean, let's back up and say, okay, my generation was coached to do as they were told. We didn't ask questions, but much of that submissiveness and rule following within team structures came from the reinforcement that our parents gave.
Yeah.
So
100%.
there's
Hmm.
very little questioning when it came time to performing what you were asked to perform.
Hmm.
This mindset was productive and it produced champions. But what we're learning now about our childhood champions is that it came at a cost, right? We had
Hmm.
NASCAR, Bella Caroli, USA Gymnastics, USA
Hmm.
Swimming.
Hmm.
More recently, some conversations about USA Soccer.
Hmm.
No sport has really been untouched
Right.
by the topic of protection of athletes. So
Right.
now it's this fear-based education that it strikes absolute terror into
Hmm.
every single parent, where they're like, before it was trust your coach until they give you a reason not to. Now
Hmm.
it's coach needs to earn your trust.
Hmm.
And maybe they never get it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting, I had a couple months back, an attorney, Matt Kaiser, on, and his law firm, they work in both doping and safe sport. And I saw him speak at a conference on the weaponization of safe sport. Right. So now there's this. I mean, sometimes when we talk about buzzwords, oh, I know that if I use this word, if I use the word bullying, if I use the word abuse, whatever, you know, here comes the fire department or whatever. And now I'm out of this difficult situation. Right. And again, you nor I nor anyone is saying that we shouldn't be looking after our athletes' well-being. I mean, that's
right.
our job. That's why we recruit a kid and we agree to be surrogate dad, surrogate mom for 4 or 5 years. I want your kid to, blossom and thrive and do well. But growth comes in those difficult moments. And, we can't every time there's a difficult moment say, I just need balance in my life. I need 3 days off. Like now there's no growth. And you don't say that to the calculus teacher. You know what? I'm not ready for the final today. There's been a lot of stress this week. The calculus teacher says, tough luck.
Yeah.
You've known about
Well,
the
I mean,
final date for 10 weeks.
the more professors I speak to, John, the more I kind of tend to think that is coming around
Oh, is
in
it?
American
Geez.
education. But I think what you're alluding to there is like in American culture, we've moved from a place of ignorance, like we didn't know this was happening, to completely shifting in
Hmm.
the other direction, where we have zero semblance of moderation when it
Hmm.
comes to figuring out how to navigate some of these scary topics. So
Right.
we're seeing this collapse inside athletics within departments who are either still operating under the umbrella of archaic practices, or they've completely shifted into this philosophy to react to every single hot button issue
Right.
um, by overloading their institutional members with directives and misguided plans that are forced onto systems that are wildly unprepared when it comes to integrating them.
Yeah. And so you talk in the article about sort of three issues, and maybe we can just, loop them in all together. One, lack of boundaries of support staff. So what's my role? Two, poor communication skills from student athletes. They haven't been taught how to communicate their needs and things well. And number three, the that a support staff will often prioritize individual needs over team needs and results, right? The team needs this from you, but the support staff is working with someone one-on-one. Well, she needs this or he needs this. It's like, yeah, but that's not what the team needs from them right now. So talk about those, because it's quite the issue.
Yeah, I'll start with the third one because I think that one has been the most prevalent in my conversations with my coaches and my network. It's that push-pull mechanism that's happening where a support staff member is saying, "This is what this athlete needs," and largely due to HIPAA and all the conversations surrounding privacy, not being part of whatever to help, not to
Mm-hmm.
interfere, not being part of that plan or knowing what trajectory that athlete is on largely leaves coaches in the dark, and that
Yeah.
athlete executing that plan alone. And when that plan collides with the overarching goal of the team,
Yeah.
it's a bad position to be put in that I am really, really convinced that support staff is not aware. Their job can end when the kid leaves the office. Our job
Right.
starts when the kid leaves the office. It's like,
Right.
okay, we got to put this into action item now. How does this affect the rest of the group? They're only saying, how does this affect this kid?
Yeah. Yeah. And support staff needs to be, I think, at practice every day, right? At on the field, like in the team meetings, like see what the behavior is, because every one of us coaches has had a conversation with a kid that then, in the game of telephone, when it gets back to a parent or a roommate or athletic trainer, is not the conversation we just had, right?
Right.
It's not what just happened, but their version of it, which oftentimes makes them look good or makes them look like the victim or whatever, that's not what's happening there, right? And so yeah, it's such a, I mean, I think it's again, the youth sports system sets kids up to score the most points, get the most goals, get noticed. It's all about you, right? So you'll get recruited, and then you come and have to be part of a collective, and you've never done that before.
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of practice in the we, and there's a ton of it in the me.
Yeah.
So they're conditioned by the time they get to us. And I think I will say this to coaches that listen to this podcast, the weight that we carry on our shoulders, assuming that the 18 years of habits that they have built up is something we can reverse. It's so heavy and we don't have to carry all of it. I think to expect someone that comes in as a first year to completely change, they're not going to change their values. They may
Hmm.
change their some of their work habits, their work rate. They may change that way, but largely the kids come in, they are who they are, and
Hmm.
and really reversing so much of that ingrained habit. It's 3% of their life if you live to be 82 years old. So
Hmm.
it's a very small portion of that, and you can have an impact, but to wear that so diligently and say, I never got through to that kid. It does happen. And I think
Hmm.
too often if you look on social media and a coach says, I couldn't do it, or sometimes you have to let kids go, there is an immediate response. No, good coaches will work with that kid. Good coaches will figure it out. And
Hmm.
there's no shame in the fact that you don't always get everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How as a coach do you operate in this environment? And you can answer as how you do, right? Which is, I think, really important for people to hear. But just your advice to people, because people think that, like, they see the football coach who gets fired and gets the $10 million buyout, or the basketball coach or whatever. That's Division I basketball and football. That's not Olympic sports. That's not most every other sport. I mean, in lots of schools, you get a revolving, rolling 1 year contract where, you know, every year you're signing a new contract. So if they let you go, you're done, right? And if you're supporting your family, now you got to pick up and move your whole family. There's no golden parachute to hang back and wait for the next right opportunity. And so there's this push and pull between pushing athletes to a standard. And if I piss off too many of the seniors, they're going to bury me in the exit interview and I'm going to lose my job. Regardless, right? You've been at Quinnipiac for over a decade. You've built a track record. But you could get a new AD in 2 years and you have no track record anymore. And they're like, it's just easier to get rid of a coach than it is to deal with this problem.
Right. And yeah, I've never had a contract. I don't even have a 1 year contract. It could be over for me at any time. So I think the pivotal moment for me with how I don't want to say survive, because I do believe in this profession that I have worked to be able to thrive and figure out,
Mm-hmm.
especially with increasing the level of legal literacy through law school.
Mm-hmm.
That has certainly developed a sense of self-belief that
Mm-hmm.
I am able to navigate these waters effectively.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, to your point about it just being this really shaky landscape, around 2016 was, again, when I started Fearless Coaching. And as a result of winning that second national championship, I had an athlete accuse me of being insensitive to mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And the messages that I was getting from, my administration is that I handled it wrong, and that I was a bad coach, and
Mm-hmm.
everything I knew to be untrue about the situation. And, you know, I for the longest time, John, it was for about a year and a half. I really struggled to go to work. And there are coaches out there right now that are in the same position. They've gotten bad feedback. They may have a parent after them. They're really operating with a group of seniors or a particular class that is after them. It's a
Yeah.
it's a real thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I moved to the space of, okay, I could be silent and I could suffer about this and I could coach inauthentically. I could coach on eggshells. I really
Mm-hmm.
could. Or if they're going to let me go anyway, I might as well coach the way that I know how, so I can feel good about that when I move on to the next chapter.
Yeah.
I think I'll tell you what I think, John. I think coaching in this environment has done such a number on people's self-confidence about the levels to which they can do other things if they were to lose their coaching job.
Mm-hmm.
They're not illuminated enough to the skills that transfer over. And that creates a really, really harsh environment of fear. That's
Mm-hmm.
like, if I don't do this, if I don't coach the way that they want me to, I'm out of here. And
Right.
that's terrifying for people.
Yeah.
So I think coming to terms with the idea that our value holds so much, even if it's not in sports. And some people, it's like cutting off their right arm if they're not in sports. It is a really, really difficult thing for some coaches to even talk about, the ones that have been eliminated who are in my network. And I think, getting to that space took me a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't an overnight thing, but continuing to coach authentically is not something that comes easy due to the fear that exists within our
No.
profession.
And I think you said that so well. And I think it's really important for people to hear, like, how difficult it was for you. And you were coming off a national championship, right? You weren't coming off a 5-12 season, right? So it's like, it's much harder to fire the coach that has done that, right? Like, but you're still facing an accusation. And the problem is these accusations of bullying or abuse or whatever it is, mental abuse, um, you know, I, as a coach, I understand I don't want that following me. And yet
Mm-hmm.
so many coaches are told, listen, if you fight this dismissal, you'll never get another job, right? You'll never get another job. So just go quietly, take your little buyout package if you get one, and go find another job and don't rock the boat. But you feel like, but wait a sec, that's not what happened. That's not, I didn't do anything wrong in this situation. I didn't do this. Like, you know, that athlete just didn't perform, right? And why is it her word means way more than mine? Of after 20 years of coaching, after 5 years at this institution, why does his word mean more than mine in this moment? And I think what happens a lot too, to bring back in the support staff, is the athlete has the conversation with the support staff. It gets reported up to the administrator that the coach reports to. It continues on for 5 or 6 months with the coach out of the loop. And then all of a sudden, the administrator goes, well, why hasn't this been addressed? And the coach says, this is the first time I've ever heard about it. So how was I supposed to address a problem I didn't know existed? Right. And so this is it. So there's also this distrust I see a lot of the people we report to as well.
Right.
And so I've met lots of coaches like, I won't have a meeting unless I record it. I won't have a practice unless I film it. Like, here's the evidence.
Yeah.
You're not going to come back on me and say I did X, Y, and Z. Like, here's the meeting.
Yeah. I think, and to that end, it's having to prepare in that way and do all of that extra, do all of that extra work in order
Yeah.
to be able to just coach.
Yeah.
Is exhausting. It's emotionally and mentally exhausting to
Yeah.
have to justify every single decision. But I would say that we are at such a critical time in the athletic world, in college athletics, where we have seen an entire generation of administrators who are ill-equipped to be able to handle the situations that are occurring off the field,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to be able to oversee and to have face-to-face conversations with their coaches. Because the
Mm-hmm.
first thing they hear when they hear the words bully or abuse, they think about it being on social media. They worry how it's going to affect enrollment if this blows up, if it gets bigger, instead of having a conversation and asking for context and saying, my experience in law school and the emphasis that I used to give to a lot of my coaches would say, document everything. What I'm finding now is your documentation doesn't even matter. The
Mm-hmm.
documentation that you're submitting, many times our head coaches that are being let go without investigations,
Mm-hmm.
they're not even interviewing the assistant coach who is there for every moment
Mm-hmm.
of those accusations. So I actually teach a seminar talking about how to handle those conversations with administrators when unfounded accusations arise,
Mm-hmm.
and to give coaches a toolbox to be able to ask more questions and not leave that room with the only choice the administrator makes is, do I retain or fire? That if you are a leader that has gotten to the point where the first time you have a conversation with your employee and the only option is hire or fire, we've done something wrong.
Right. Right. Exactly. There should be this ongoing conversation. And I think as a coach, you want to be ahead of any issue, right? It should come in from you first. Hey, there's something's coming up with this kid and whatever. How do you want to navigate this? Let's navigate this together. What do you guys say from administrative? This is how I see it as a coach or whatever. And so you might have to cede some power in that decision making, but at least cede it to the person above you, not the people below you, is important. Talk about your law school. I mean, what made you say I'm going to law school? Because I mean, I said that many years ago, and best decision I ever made in my life was to not go to law school. So, yeah, why'd you do it? Why?
So I saw about 5 years ago, I saw this landscape taking a deep slide, and the conversation being unearthed about athletes being employees, and the Alston case, and just scratching the surface of where we were headed. That wasn't going to die, and I don't know why anyone ever thought it was going to die. So the emphasis I have in law school is labor and employment.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation surrounding NIL and collective bargaining, I want to be one of the people that understands this. And I'm not just a coach standing around saying, well, I wonder what the Power Five is going to do. I guess we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to be equipped with that, not only for my purposes professionally, but also for the purpose of empowering other coaches with legal literacy to be able to have these conversations concerning their future, because I think our future as coaches is at stake. If you are
Mm-hmm.
not a Power Five coach, you're a mid-major Division II, Division III. Our professions are very much in jeopardy over this latest conversation, considering the Dartmouth case and the NLRB. it's ongoing, but no one's saving us at the moment. And
Mhm.
I don't know that you could walk into many athletic departments right now and an athletic director who runs the entire department, I don't think that they could fully explain to you what's going on.
Mhm.
And because of that, that's why you're seeing staffs that are relatively complacent in waiting for this train to hit us.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be complacent. So
Yeah.
that's why I did it.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you've written articles on LinkedIn and stuff that I've read just about, do you know whether, how you can get hired and fired? Do you know your rights as a coach? Do you know your rights as an employee so you don't get drummed out the door? And are you staying ahead of this so that, I mean, again, you've got a family, you've got kids in school, whatever it is, you should know, you should be able to advocate for yourself, and not just, rely on the whims of the school's attorney who says, yeah, just go quietly and here's a couple bucks, and go off into the sunset with this thing hanging over you of, well, why did you leave your last job?
Right. Again, I think that's a general fear, which is why many good coaches exit without us ever even hearing about it.
Hmm.
Too often, I get coaches after the fact that are like, this is what happened. My goal is to really reach coaches prior to them being in those rooms
Hmm.
so they can be prepared. And it's always fascinating to me because anyone who has a job should have some level of employment legal literacy. Anyone who's a boss, anyone who has any job, understanding what your rights are as an employee is really critical, but more so critical for coaches because we've lived in this universe where athletics pretty much makes its own laws
Hmm.
inside of its sphere. And it's largely unknown to general counsel and to HR what's going on. And for someone who is an assistant athletic director to conduct an investigation on a coach without any type of certification in that area is insane.
Hmm.
And we're seeing it so much. And for coaches not to be equipped to be able to ask questions on those dismissals and to leave rooms and not know why. I
Hmm.
will say this to the people that are listening. If you are caught in a room where a athletic administrator or HR representative is letting you go and they are not able to articulate exactly why, chances are very high that they did not commit their due diligence in creating and following all the legal steps they should have in documentation to
Hmm.
justify that in a court of law. You should
Hmm.
not sign anything, and you should feel a lot stronger in that room if they're not able to tell you why.
Hmm.
And we could talk all day long about what at will employment looks like, and sometimes they can pull that card, but it is an entirely different universe when athletics believes that it can treat employees the way that it does. That's wildly different than the rest of the population.
And I think you've written as well, it's seemingly worse for female coaches than male coaches. The behavior that they might let a female coach go for, they'd never let it wouldn't raise the red flag necessarily on a male coach.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to make that distinction too, because I do have men that are in my network, and it really depends on the gender of team that they are coaching.
True.
So I think the female coach population, especially vulnerable, women of color, certainly men that are coaching non-revenue sports,
Hmm.
the conversation surrounding their departure when a coach is not given the resources that they need to align with the goals that the department has established
Right.
for them. Justifying that dismissal becomes more about creating narratives that suit a firing rather than there being a genuine measured result from why they want to get rid of that coach. So that's what we're seeing more frequently. Um, definitely using student athlete feedback in order to facilitate a firing, saying athletes don't like you anymore. There's nothing we can do. It's nothing you did, but like athletes don't like you, so you got to go.
Hmm.
Because who's going to say no to athletes that feel the quote unsafe or
Right.
feel they're being bullied? You're really relying heavily on a fact finder to not side with 18 to 22-year-olds that claim they've been abused.
Right. Right. I mean, should a coach who gets offered a job at the collegiate level walk in and say to the AD or who's ever hiring, how do you define success? Like, what are the metrics? What are my KPIs that you say this is a successful season? Is it GPA? Is it um, athlete feedback? Is it wins? Is it whatever?
Yeah.
Because like how do I know I've done well? Because if I win a lot and that, some kids are unhappy, is that not successful? If I win a lot, but our GPA is terrible, is that unsuccessful? Like, how do I know that I'm winning?
I think those are critical questions, and I think it really depends on the desires of what you want to know as a candidate. If that's important to you, and if it should be important, what am I going to be measured on? I will say more often than not, I see throughout the year as the coach is hired and through season and postseason, if you don't have that in writing, those metrics can change.
Yeah,
They have been they have been known to change. My own partner was let go from Providence College as the softball coach, where initially was measured on academics, community service, and health and wellness of the athletes. And then as soon as Big East play came around, it was positioned within the conference
yeah,
after not competing for 2 years in COVID.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so those metrics all of a sudden change. But I think, John, what's even more valuable in that regard to ask when you're taking a job is to present scenarios rather than blanket questions and say, in this instance, if this were to happen and an athlete was unhappy, how do we handle it here at this institution? What does that hierarchy look like, and where do those complaints go? What
mm,
can I expect in terms of support, not just budgetarily, but philosophically and within the structure? Who do I report to? And when things go awry, when does HR become involved? I would venture a guess that there are many athletic directors who could not answer that question, given the state of disarray of the structures within athletic departments not being well defined.
yeah. I mean, that's phenomenal advice right there, right? Present scenarios and say, what's the right decision in this scenario, right? This kid is struggling. I need to bench him because they're not performing. Do I bench him because I think this other kid gives us a chance to win? Do I keep him in? What do I do? Yeah, I mean, there's so many different scenarios there that are so difficult, or someone coming off an injury, or I mean, I've had Division I coaches tell me, they've had players come in and say, it's a fall sport, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to take the spring off, right? And they're on a huge scholarship,
Right.
right? I'm just taking the spring off. What, mental wellness. What am I supposed to do? Right. And I'm like, again, talk to your lawyer and then talk to your administrator and get, follow their guidance or whatever. But you also have to
Right.
have standards.
Right. And I think those scenarios are incredibly helpful. They're often things that are not the traditional ask. Tell me about your journey.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What was your
exactly.
win-loss record? It's we hire, I think the hiring process for athletics has become largely archaic in itself, with the same questions recycled and the metrics that we use for people that have the potential. You
Mhm.
could have a coach that comes into your pool that had a losing season at their last institution. And they say, well, what kind of resources did you have there? All
Right,
those things were a consideration of whether or not they were successful, not just did they win or did they lose.
right,
We're
right.
not we're not we're not asking those questions. So I think that to be better equipped, if you are to give those scenarios to a prospective athletic director or assistant athletic director in that interview process, and they say something to the effect of, well, it's unknown. It'd be based on the situation. Okay, well, for that situation, who else would be involved beside you?
Yeah.
Again, I wouldn't be able to answer that. If they can't answer that, you need to run away.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is the thing, right? In this world of social media and public outings, right? It's like you could have, all of a sudden a bunch of horrible headlines written about you for something you never did because no one ever reads the retraction, right? And next thing so when you step out to coach now, you're putting your family's financial future sometimes at risk if you don't know what I'm out there for. And this isn't just a college coach who maybe is making a full-time living. This is the local club coach. This is the local even volunteer coach. And it's scary. I mean, we talk a lot about the shortage of officials and referees and umpires right now. I think we're gonna have a coach shortage soon enough if the continued weaponization of things like safe sport and just the ease of going after a high school coach who's working on a couple $1,000 stipend and destroying his or her reputation in the local newspaper.
Yeah.
I mean, why would I want that job?
I think John, I think we're already there in
Yeah.
terms of people, the population starting to dwindle. I've lost a lot of good coaches within our network, and this year especially. I probably average 3 to 6 calls a week
Hmm.
in conversations of evaluations and premature firings. So I think for our population, I don't ever mean to continually blame COVID-19 for it, but one of the things it certainly did, and I'm sure you've probably talked about this on your other podcast, but one of the things it did is it illuminated us to the crazy nature of this job
Hmm.
and level of time commitment, and showed people just how much time they were losing with their families. And I think it's reframed a lot of the opportunity of it used to be I get to coach and now it's kind of feels like I have to, but I'm willing to do all those things, but not with all of these residual effects from outside forces that are making it near impossible for me to do my job. So I think our stamina has always been insane
Hmm.
as college coaches. It's always been insane, but our tolerance is less.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
100%. Well, that's I mean, Becky, we could go on another hour here, but I want to be respectful of your time. Can you tell people how to connect with you, best place to follow you, whether it's LinkedIn or website or anything like that, how they can get your articles because they're well worth reading.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, John. So my website will have you signing up for the newsletter. It's always in my articles. It's thefearlesscoach.org. And I can be followed on X and LinkedIn. Just look for me on LinkedIn as Coach Carlson, Quinnipiac University. And on X, it's TF Coach Carlson. I'm also on Instagram, same handle at TF Coach Carlson.
TF Coach Carlson. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put all those links in the show notes for everyone. Any final thought before we sign off here? Any last piece of advice to our coaches listening today?
I really, really want to encourage the coaches that are listening to this that to know that because we're at such a critical period in our history as leaders, we are teachers, teachers are coaches, and coaches are leaders. And the ability for the system to convince us that we are only coaches and not people is very strong. And always remember that when you are in the thick of things and when you are facing a lot of the issues that John and I had talked about today, that you have rights, you have value, and you are one of the last lines standing between accountability and not. So keep doing everything that you're doing.
Love it. And I always go back to, you can influence more people in a year than some people get to influence in their lifetime. And we all sign off this podcast saying your influence is never neutral. So, in spite of all the obstacles and things, you still get that phone call 10 years later, that wedding invitation 10 years later. Those are the real paychecks that we get in coaching for sure. So, thank you for everything that you're doing, Becky. I think it's so important. You're bringing light to really important issues. And, this is only the beginning, I think, of, the advocacy work that you're doing. You're only going to get busier, sadly. Or maybe that's a good thing, but, congratulations on bringing light to all these things. We truly, I know the whole profession and vocation of coaching owes you a debt of gratitude. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, John.
Phew, everyone, thanks for listening. Thank you again to Becky Carlson, at TF Coach Carlson on X and Instagram, thefearlesscoach.org. is her website. And like I said, I follow her on LinkedIn. So just look for Becky Carlson, Quinnipiac Rugby on there. And she posts all our articles on there as well and has a great community of followers there. But that was an amazing conversation. I think one that we have to keep having in order to how do we best support coaches? How do coaches know how they can be hired or fired? How do we create a culture of high standards and expectations and yet manage support staff and prioritize team needs over individual needs and so much more. And it can be a scary world right now for coaches for sure. So again, thanks for listening. Thank you to Sprocket Sports. Thank you to our Patreon podcast champions. If you want to become a supporter of this podcast, go to patreon.com/way of champions, make a small donation every month, and we'll get you about $300 of online courses for free just for supporting our podcast. And again, sign up soon, save $100 on the Way Champions Conference, August 9th, 10th, and 11th, Denver, Colorado. And if you have a group of 5 or more, that's the most impactful way. Bring your whole staff, bring a bunch of coaches from your athletic department. That's how you truly change the culture. So we'll give you 50% off if you have 5 or more. There's a live stream option. There is obviously the in-person option, which is our favorite and our best. And we're about to start announcing some amazing coaches. So I made it through the podcast. As you all heard, my voice was not great, dealing with a little cold here, but I made it through. And thankfully, because Becky had a lot of really important stuff to say. So remember, everyone, your influence is never neutral. So go out there, change the world, make a difference this week, positively impact your athletes. And we'll see you again next week.